For I am a man. Oh, dang it. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Just take it from the centurion reply.
Okay. No, I did not. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve you. Oh, dang it, JJ. Can we all just admit something? It's nice to be in control, isn't it? For those of you who drive, do you remember the first time your parents let you take the car out by yourself? That was probably an awesome feeling, wasn't it? Slightly terrifying, but awesome nonetheless. For those of you who don't drive, can't you just imagine that one day? Doesn't it make you excited to think about? Does it make you a little depressed to think about how far away that day is, maybe? There's something in most of us that says, I should be in control of my life. After all, isn't it better in control than being out of control? When it comes to home, school, work, practice, weekends, wouldn't it be easier if you could call the shots? In fact, take a second and think about the people who rule your life, your parents, your teachers, your coaches, etc. Raise your hand while you're watching if you wish you had more control and they had less when it comes to your phone, TV or internet, who you hang out with, who you date, your schedule, your curfew, your chores in the house, and even what you buy. On and on I could go, right? Deep down, most of us believe that we're the best person to be in charge of our lives. Because if we had more control, things would go better for us, right? Wanting control is a normal way to think. In fact, the older you get, the more things you should be in control of. An 18-year-old controlling a vehicle, that makes sense. An 8-year-old controlling it one, that makes me nervous. Although I've watched some of you drive, and you do drive like you're 8. The problem with taking control is that it has its limits. Taking control is great until it doesn't work. Until you hit the moment when I can turns into I can't. That's because no matter who you are, there's always comes a point when your ability runs out, or your strength runs out, or your intelligence runs out, or your control runs out. See, you can be in charge of your actions, but you can't always be in charge of the outcomes. Sometimes, even if you do your best to control a situation, it still turns out differently than you expected. For instance, you studied for a test, but you still bombed it. You treated your boyfriend or girlfriend great, but you still got dumped. You did the right thing, but you still got in trouble. You tried to keep your parents together, but they split up. You prayed as much as you could for a situation to get better, but nothing happened. It happens to everyone, and when it does, most of us respond in one of two ways. Number one, you take charge completely. We push harder, we do more. Some of you obsess over your grades, you're completely stressed out. Some of you freak out every day at practice. Everything you do is in hopes of controlling whether or not your coach notices you. Some of you take 100 pictures of yourself before you post one on Instagram, all in hopes of controlling the way other people see you. Some of you even try hard to really be religious in hopes of controlling what God thinks about you. Here's the second response. Some of you give up completely. Some of you, because you've learned that you can't control outcomes, you've decided to just stop taking responsibility for anything. You've stopped studying. You've stopped trying. You've stopped praying. When things don't go your way, you blame God or other people, thinking, hey, it's not like I could change things if I wanted to. Unfortunately, neither way helps us get the outcome that we really want. So the question is, if these don't work, what should we do? Are there any options left? Some of the worst moments in life occur when we realize that we can't, when our ability to control outcomes completely runs out. That's exactly what a centurion thought when he encountered Jesus. This officer had a lot of authority, and he thought he was supposed to command and control everything. But then he had a huge I can't moment, a moment when his ability to control ran out. And in that moment, he went to Jesus. And as we've already seen in this series, when people truly encounter Jesus, their lives were forever flipped upside down. That's what happened with this centurion. When it all started with him approaching Jesus. In Matthew 5:8, it says, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. The centurion was a high-ranking officer responsible for at least 100 men in Rome's army. He was a strong leader. He was a man's man, like picture Thor in a tunic. He had money, power, and everyone did what he asked them to do. This guy definitely understood having control and being in charge. It says this, "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion's servant is sick, right? In that day and age, a servant was more like an estate manager than he was an assistant who picked up Starbucks. In the case of a centurion, a servant would have been especially important because of his power and position. And apparently, the centurion had grown to respect and appreciate this particular servant who was sick. But here's the problem. There was nothing the centurion could do to control the outcome. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't stop his servant from dying. No matter how many people he commanded, he couldn't make a severely sick person become healthy again. The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." The centurion asked Jesus to say the word. That's an interesting phrase because that's how the centurion operated. He said the word, and people scurried to follow his orders. In fact, that's how he responded to his bosses too. The person in charge gives the commands. That's how authority works. So by asking Jesus to say the word, the centurion is saying, in this case, Jesus, you have the authority. In this case, you're in charge, not me. I may be able to control most things, but ultimately, I need you to do what I cannot do. The centurion's authority was eclipsed. He was no longer in control, and that wasn't a bad thing. In fact, it was a really good thing because he was standing out in front of the one who could simply say the word. The centurion didn't have to control everything. All he had to do was one thing, trust the one who could. The centurion didn't have to try harder, and he didn't need to quit trying and give up completely. He had a third option, and that's surrender. And that's our option too, and also the main point of today to take away. When your ability runs out, Jesus' ability keeps going. When we can no longer control our lives, we can trust the one who is in control. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." Jesus told the officer he would heal the servant. The servant was healed that very hour. It was an absolute miracle. But with all the things that Jesus did, saw, and demonstrated, the one thing that astonished Jesus was a man who had confidence in Jesus' authority and control. Maybe the miracle wasn't just the healing of the servant, but also in the way the centurion approached Jesus in the first place. If you're like me, one of my goals in life is to get the outcomes I want. Sometimes we and I even think that we should pray hard enough, work hard enough, behave good enough, and we'll get to a place in life where everything goes according to plan. But when things don't go the way we want, we try to control more, or we give up. But we miss the crucial thing that God wants for us. It's the crucial thing that we saw in Jesus' interaction with the centurion. Getting to a place where we can acknowledge Jesus' authority is everything. Even the things we want to go differently. There's no guarantee that everything will go smoothly. There's no promise that we'll never get sick, get dumped, fail tests, have unflattering pics of us on Instagram. We can get to a point where we let our ability to control run out, and then we embrace a third option, surrender. This means that we won't be able to manipulate our way into perfect endings to every situation in our lives. We must figure out a better way. Here's what I want you to do. Realize that you're not in control. Trust me, if I had the ability to be in control, coronavirus would have been done day one. But I don't. And you can't control circumstances, but you can control your behavior in those circumstances, which means you aren't responsible for your parents' marriage, your grandmother's health, or even natural disasters. Even though things may be difficult, relax and know that not everything depends on you. You can also just embrace it. It's actually a good thing because your ability, your judgment, and opinion doesn't always get you what you want anyways. In fact, sometimes it takes you in the opposite direction. Maybe you've heard your parents talk about how easy it is to be a teenager. That's because the older you get, the more control you have over certain things, the more overwhelming it can feel. Sometimes just being happy that it's not all riding on you. I think you can also submit. Surrender to God's control and authority. Remember, when your ability runs out, Jesus' ability keeps going. God wants to push you forward. He doesn't want to hold you back. He wants to lift you up, not keep you down. He wants to guide you and protect you. He wants to protect you and help avoid the pitfalls. Every single one of us is going to have to make a decision at some point, hopefully this season, and maybe on a regular basis. Who's going to be in charge of our hearts? Who's ultimately responsible for the world? Some days we need to make that decision a dozen times. Other days it'll be easier. Either way, you can get in the habit of believing and then acting like Jesus is in charge. You can repeatedly say, when my ability runs out, Jesus' ability keeps going. So what if you started believing today that God cared about your life as much as you do? Even if you're not sure, even if it's scary, even if it's just for this week, would you be willing to choose to let him be in charge? What would that look like for you? In your dating life, in your relationship with parents, in your weekend plans? Often surrender starts with prayer, taking fears, hopes, expectations, and disappointments and telling God about them. Then saying what the centurion said to Jesus, I'm not in charge. God, you know what I want, but you say the word and make the final call. I'm going to let you be in charge. And I'm going to ask you to help me if things don't go the way I think they should. Every time I've chosen to let Jesus be in charge, it's been the best decision. Not because everything became perfect, but because I got to see Jesus work perfectly in the midst of imperfection. And I've learned that when my ability runs out, Jesus' ability keeps going. So I want to challenge you to think about the areas of your life where you're holding on too tightly and the areas of your life where you've simply given up. And I want you to consider a third option, surrender.